move approval of that. Bruce,
So moved. This is Edmund, so moved.
thank you. And I have a second from Mel. Right, any comments? Very well, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Got that, right? Any opposed? Any abstentions? Very good. Motion passes. Thank you.
New territory.
I don't really know what to say to that.
Keep the big low.
All right, and I don't believe we've had any submitted public comments for this meeting. And so we'll dive right into our agenda. I want to thank those of you who were able to complete our project ranking and selection processes. I'll give you a little bit of background on the results. You have those in your packet, and would ask that you out as we discuss this. So 20 out of our 29 members completed the selection process. If you recall, that was the process which resulted in a conglomerate thought process of the committee as to which projects should be included in the in a $1.1 billion budget for corridor projects. Additionally, we did this so that we could also see where the next group would be if the committee continues to push forward with a reduction in the overall in its recommendation for the overall amount of funding for the corridor projects. Currently, according to my math, it's somewhere around 980 million. So another 150 or so million would need to come off, and I had hoped, and I think we get into this, you'll see that I think we still can use it at least for some of the information that we're looking for. To put a second cut should it be what the committee ultimately goes forward with. So if you take a look at the ranking process, you can see that there were 9 projects that would need to be removed in order to get down to the 1.1 billion. Again, that was as a result of the inflationary increase in project costs, project estimates, I should say, that has recently been completed by consultants to the individual jurisdictions, and they're working through rectifying their individual project scopes of work and costs, et cetera. So we needed to find 360 or so million dollars worth of projects, and that was kind of the focal point of this process. So there were 9 projects that would need to be cut based on the ranking process. The selection process that we did would have cut 8. In case of the selection, if we went to the second level, which is 980 or so million dollars of recommendations, then we would be up to 11, which is a full third of those projects that would move. Under the ranking process, it's more profound. There are 9, as I said, there are 9 projects that would be cut in order to reach the 1.1 billion, and another 5 projects, by my count at least, to get to the 987. Now that would leave us at a total of 14 projects out of 33 that would have to be cut. So 19 out of that. Just as a reminder, the number of named projects in RTA one was 35. So it'll give you kind of and when you consider that this has more money in it, this one, even the pessimistic estimate has a larger budget. You can see what the results of 20 years of inflation, as well as in construction cost increases, as well as the most recent huge run up in costs is potentially going to mean to this plan. Okay, so a couple of things, couple of notes that I made that I'd like to share with you as far as my assessment of the two processes, and I'm happy to hear your takes on it as well. First, I think individual jurisdictional priorities were somewhat lost in our process, and it makes some sense. The results of combining all of our thoughts together will in some cases result in some jump around of the individual jurisdictional priorities. And so that's something that I think has to be addressed and rectified by our committee, at least to be faced and considered. An example of that is that the town of Oro Valley has the two projects, Shannon and Lambert Lane, that are actually reversed on our ranking order. In fact, so one shows up perhaps close to the cut line, the other is almost dead last, I guess. So that's something that we have to look at. You may want at some point to get confirmation from Oro Valley that is indeed the priority that they have as a community for those individual projects. It also has an impact, of course, on the dollar amounts that we have and how quickly or slowly we get to the level of the 1.1 billion. In fact, when we look at the overall regional coverage of, and you can do that on our online tool, look at the map and kind of toggle between the projects that were recommended by the group and the projects that were not, so that you can look at all 33 and then toggle back to the ones that, if you will, made the cut and see where the holes are or where projects are being lost, if you will. That's an important process. We've talked about it for years here, that regional coverage of these projects is crucial to both jurisdictional priorities, but also to voter turnout and support. So that's something that we'll definitely have to get more involved in this ranking and selection process. Yeah, and in fact, if there are no projects in Oro Valley, I think I can hear the reaction at this time all the way from Oro Valley to here, and I don't think the committee is really intending for that to happen, certainly. So we'll have to figure out how it is that we'll do that. And I told you when we started this process that this would be a starting point for us as far as how we would begin to look at projects that had the most support and perhaps the least support. And we have to pull in some of these other factors, certainly. Yeah, and it is interesting that another thing that doesn't really show up directly, although it may be the intention of some of the people who did the exercise, but some of the significant non-RTA funds that would help leverage these projects would be lost depending on where you draw the line. Certainly a project like the second half of the State Route 210 project, where there's $169 million of other funding that's committed to that project. It's kind of an eye opener as far as our current list, perhaps not leveraging those non-RTA funds as much as they could. And then by my count, there were like 6 of the selected projects that ranked below the line in the priorities. So, or I'm sorry, in the ranking. So, the 2 exercises, I guess not surprisingly, but sadly, I guess, and from my perspective, did return significantly different results, and we need to address that. I guess my inclination would be to at least start with the selection process that we did, simply because we had 2/3 of the committee, weigh in on it. Whereas just barely half of the committee was able to complete the ranking process. And then, although those projects that fall in and out, depending on which of the 2 ranking processes you look at, are impactful, the low ones that end up with a high ranking and vice versa, it does make our process, I guess, a little bit more difficult, and certainly something we'll have to do. At the Technical Management Committee meeting last week, these preliminary or these results were shared, and the committee recognized that there wasn't a lot that as a committee they could really do with that, except that the best thing they thought was to work together with us again and to reconvene our ad hoc committee, which just to remind you was 6 of us and 9 jurisdictions with their management team representing. We worked together so that we could then come back to our respective groups with the idea of what we thought would be a good idea. A smaller group in order to try to put together this kind of a ranking system, especially with the pain involved of the losses of projects or the inability of us to fund those based on current circumstances is important for us to find a collaborative process to rectify that. So among the things that the ad hoc committee is going to try to piece together and supplement these lists with, I've talked about, but let me just kind of summarize them. We need to overlay those jurisdictional priorities to see where individual projects might fall within a jurisdiction and within our ranking and the project lists. Okay, so to see whether there's agreement at least about how they're presented. Right. We'll also need to consider any projects that might convert to categorical scopes. We've talked about it in the past, but if we look at the reserve list that's going to be developed here, that is those projects that would bring the total up to 33 from whatever number we end up with as the recommended amount to the board to be on the plan. That some of those projects may be at least partially developable through a categorical process. And that'll be something that'll be discussed by this ad hoc committee as well. And then finally, well, maybe one other thing is there needs to be an assessment. This is largely a jurisdiction PMC responsibility, but we need to look at which of the 4 delivery periods each project would fall into. And in order to do that, you have to kind of look at what type of project it is. Is it perhaps shovel ready? Is it one that still needs to go through a full environmental and right of way and utility and design process? And what does the jurisdiction that is going to lead that project thinking about the time frame necessary to bring it to fruition, to bring it to bid? And included in that is how much money will be in the RTA coffers by that time. How does that get perhaps moved up or back, depending on any of those moving parts? So it's quite the art and science, I guess, combined. And we'll wait. CAC will wait to see how that unwinds, largely with the inputs from those jurisdictions at the TMC. And so some of that will also be discussed by the ad hoc committee. And then finally, those non-RTA contributions that I talked about, and the loss of leverage in a few cases that represents, depending on which projects we carry forward and which ones may end up on the reserve list. So with that as kind of a preamble, if you will, rambling preamble, I would ask if anybody has any specific comments or concerns. Farhad, if there's anything you'd like to add.
No, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Well done. You did a great job of summarizing the feedback from the TMC. We had a few slides that I'm not sure if we need to go over that again. You did a good job of covering the details, but for everybody's interest, we'll include that slide packet in your packet for next time around. But well said. Good feedback from the TMC, and we're looking forward to having that follow-up discussion with the ad hoc group.
Okay. Dale.
I'm going to reiterate what I said in the previous meeting about, we have one project in this entire ranking that is a $160 million project. It's the only project that is over $100 million. And I would still like to see that project broken into parts, because I have a really hard time. We're talking $800 million, seeing 160 million of it go to that one location.
I'd ask if we've gotten any
Yeah,
feedback.
if I may, Mr. Chair, and you touched on it a little bit earlier as well. So we've had that conversation not only on that project, on all projects, to have any proposed scope changes or limit changes to help with the whole cost reduction exercise. And I believe Carmine and his team are looking at it. And again, I want to stress that they're doing that for all projects, not just that one project. So hopefully we'll get updates on any potential scope changes or project limit changes as we move forward.
Yeah, I want to make it clear, as I told Bruce earlier, I was out there driving around yesterday, but I think there should be a project, but I'm not sure as that's defined, it really is.
Let me ask if either Peter or Crystal can pull up page 10 of our packet. That's basically the selection spreadsheet. Comment, Bruce?
Yeah, I thought the issues that you outlined were right on task. I counted 5 of them. I don't know exactly how many they were, but it seemed to me to be really helpful as the TMC and the ad hoc committee is to make those explicit issues sort of put them in a matrix analysis so that we can really see how they lay out against each of the projects, because it's really challenging to try to factor all these together and understand how they interplay with one another. I found the exercise sort of subjective in terms of, our exercise versus the rankings that were more objective, and I've struggled with that. So it would be really helpful to understand as the discussion goes on in the ad hoc committee, how those different factors are evaluated and be explicit about it rather than implicit. I recognize what you say it's part art, part science, but it'd be really helpful to have that sort of laid out for us by that group.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and I will bring that forward with them. Just a reminder, when we were doing these exercises, we had there farther to the right, we may have had to scroll to find them, but we had the individual rankings from the TMC and from our own two different processes. And so from those, I think could have either gotten much more confused or started to get a little bit of the flavor for the importance of some of the projects. And to some extent, I think that did come through in what we ended up with. But I think in another way, it just sort of melted together. The different viewpoints perhaps that we bring to the table. And part of the reason for that was that we wanted to provide a collaborative, review of the importance of the individual projects. And that means that, and that's why I kept harping on try to get everyone to complete the process, to complete the exercise, so that we actually are looking at something that's representative of the group think, if you will. Carolyn.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little unclear what we're suggesting. Are you saying that we give both of these different exercises to the TMC for their discussion without us discussing anything further, such as, you were talking about the issue of Oro Valley not having any projects? Should we have any of that discussion that we had before about looking at these through the projects through a couple different filters, like the regionality and what Dale was talking about, with one project being fairly large in comparison to all of the others? And that would be one question. And it seems like we would want to do that a little before we just gave the raw data to the TMC ad hoc. But my other question is that seems like two disparate exercises we went through. It seemed like it would be more value to just give them the prioritized list, that exercise we went through, because it's kind of confusing looking at both of them together and wondering how those two lists are fairly different.
Second, first, I think that the selection tool gives us a de facto ranking of sorts. And the reason I say that is because it lists how many times an individual project was supported. And as an example, the first 5 on the list all had 17 of the 20 respondents say that they were important. So to me, those are priority 1A through 1E, and kind of down the same way. I guess the question I have, and we certainly have already provided these two results, if you will, to the TMC. But my intention for today's meeting, to your first question, is for us to go over kind of those 5 issues, so that the members of the ad hoc committee that represent the rest of this committee in providing input and information and discussion, if you will, with TMC ad hoc committee will understand more or less what the rest of the committee was about. But yes, that's what I want to go into now, actually.
Okay, good. I'm just wanted to let everybody know, both of us were at the last TMC meeting, and there were the question that was coming up a lot from different members was, what is the group's thinking on all this? And we're telling them that we haven't had a group discussion. These are all just individual minds. So good, I'm glad. I guess it sounded like we were really focusing on the ad hoc. So looking forward to it. Thanks.
Further comments? Let's go into those individual questions that I brought up, or those individual issues that I think that the ad hoc committee tends to, and certainly what my own agenda would be in terms of input from the CAC into the TMC's review of work that we've done. So the first of those was the jurisdictional priorities, and I wonder, Peter, if it's possible, I assume you have this in a live version where we can toggle between the selected and non-selected projects to get an idea, or between all projects and selected projects. Yeah, to where just from a 30,000 foot level, we can see where does this selection exercise create holes.
Or this is just strictly the selected projects here.
Okay, and so you can unselect all, I guess, and toggle back then. Wow, that's stark, isn't it? Just me. Kevin?
So this is based on yes or no, should be in the plan or not in the plan,
Correct.
not the rankings.
Yeah, no, this is the 8 projects that are cut is what disappears when Peter toggles it back.
Another way to describe it, Mr. Chair, if I may, it's your fiscally constrained budget. So you have a budget, and for that budget, those are the projects that have been selected by a significant number of folks.
Right, and just to remind folks of what that list is, you can see that here on your selections spreadsheet. Those are $157 million project that Dale is bringing up, as well as a Sarita project on La Villita, the Oro Valley Lambert Lane, and the Oro Valley Shannon Road projects, both fall in there. Pima County's Orange Grove Road, ADOT Sonoran Corridor, the Marana sponsored Tangerine Road I-10 traffic interchange, and the Pasco Yaqui South Camino de Oeste project. That's one of them that I wanted to point out to folks. Had a ranking of number 4, and yet it was second to the last as far as our selection of projects that should make the list. So obviously we need to discuss that sort of thing. So any comments about the what this jurisdictional coverage, Kevin?
I almost hate to bring this up, but so the Colossal Cave project at 160 million, obviously that's very expensive. I know when we first originally kind of cut this list down, We also had a Mary Ann Cleveland project down there, and we felt it was important to have some sort of representation down there in the Vail area, because I believe they're the only ones that actually provided a public comment. Although I may be misremembering that, but I know they did have a group that provided some comments. I'm wondering, given the expense of the Colossal Cave project, is it worthwhile to go back and look at the Mary Ann Cleveland project again as a substitute?
So, Mr. Chair, Kevin, that's what Dale brought up as well, and that's what they're looking at to see if there's a way to change the limit or the scopes, and that's an option to go back to the original 3 sections.
Well, are you asking the Mac Way as an alternate proposal or the pieces that made up the ultimates?
No, I think. I'm
Colossal
saying
Cave was an
the-
assemblage of 3 projects, 2 from the county, 1 from the city to make that one up that included Mac Way improvements plus Colossal. Or are you asking for the Mac Way project that went all the way over to Houghton and was completed, it was submitted as a separate one?
I'm thinking I'm talking about the latter, the full thing, but I'm not sure how that compares in cost either.
Yeah, could you pull up that project on its own?
For the,
So this is
so-
the combined scope.
Yeah, this combines the,
So this is a combination of Colossal Cave plus Mary Ann Cleveland, where Mary Ann Cleveland turns into Colossal. There was also another project that went from I-10 all the way out here to essentially the same intersection junction that was originally then not part of the 33. That what you're talking
I
about?
went from Houghton.
Went from Houghton, yeah, it went
Yeah,
through
this-
the entire
The
section.
I-10 one, I'm assuming the reason this is so expensive is to get over the railroad.
Correct. That's the big component of it.
Is it worthwhile looking at Mary Ann Cleveland for Houghton as an alternative that I'm assuming would be less expensive?
Bruce?
Yeah, I think the expression of the Vail community was that this project was far more significant to them than the project on Mary Ann Cleveland Way. I'm not sure that that's a good substitute. I think probably what Dale's suggesting is, can this project be broken up into pieces? And it would make sense to put a portion of that project, this project into it, not the full 150 million.
57 million.
That's exactly where my thought process is, because I had understood that the Vail community really wanted this, and I'm trying to say, is there some way to do it? Including, do we just say, we're gonna build the roadway, but we're not gonna build the overpass? Yeah.
Is that a project worth doing?
And that becomes another question. That's where we need input.
I know my initial take would be that that's not a project worth doing.
Yeah.
The highest priority for that shown corridor is clearly the safety and, great separation of the railroad crossing.
If I might, Mr. Chair, the other problem is that one of the issues here is the alignment of that road, whether it goes on the existing roadway or is given an alternative. Very difficult to break this up in pieces without having made that decision about the roadway alignment, because you'd be building a roadway that went to the wrong place. So it becomes very complex on this project to figure out how to sort this out.
So possibly a interim solution might be to have the RTA fund that study and, a full-blown study of the alternatives and costs thereof. And during that time, look for opportunities to fund it. The main project would remain in the reserve list, and you possibly would be able to afford it if revenues became such that it covered the extra cost.
Or an alternative to that is north of the railroad tracks all the way to Camino Loma Alta. That's where the most congestion is. Those roadway improvements could probably be made without having to deal with the broader issue of railroad crossings and connection to Interstate 10.
So would you need to widen the at-grade crossing then at the railroad?
I don't know. I'm not.
What do you think, Rick?
I'm going to jump in and say we did look, so there was a couple things in here. The project as proposed, when we were working with the county and in order to lay it out, It's critical to note that it's mainline Colossal Cave and Vale Road that goes up and over the railroad tracks. We still have a local area in there with a street connection that we've got to provide at grade crossing. So the entire roadway does not get elevated. The main part does, but there's still a connection piece that has to remain at grade so that we don't isolate or landlock everything between the tracks. The second component to the question you're asking, we did work with the county and identified a parallel alignment that would go a little bit to the west. As an alternate alignment would still be kind of essentially a 2-lane roadway. So you're still providing that capability and capacity. And that was an alternative that may be less impact. We only took a cursory look at it. We geometrically laid it out. It essentially comes down in front of the high school and touches back down to Marianne Cleveland Way. It's roughly about the same cost. So what it takes to get those improvements, that kind of throughput capacity between the interstate and Camino Loma Alta, going over railroad tracks partially, is that price tag. And it addresses all that stuff. If you scale those improvements back, you're leaving then existing conditions out there, of which we've heard, as they've discussed, lack of bike and ped facilities, congestion issues, safety concerns.
Now, let me make sure I understand what the ramifications would be to widening the at-grade crossing to allow, full uses. You're not only going to waste that pavement, but you also, in order to build an overpass, have to go way up in the air, which means that you're going to have huge amounts of fill. Seems like you'd have a mile of road lost in that sort of a interim improvement, if you will. You know what I'm saying? If you want 4 lanes north of the, bridge, the railroad bridge or proposed railroad bridge, you're going to lose probably a half mile of that ultimately when you do put a bridge in. But based on the cost, that might be 20 years from now too. First,
Yeah, again, this is just a really complex issue because there are concerns about impacting historical structures. There's also a school right there that would be impacted by what's being proposed. It seems to me that this needs more refinement in collaboration with the Vail community before a decision could be made on it. So maybe there's an alternative way to provide for funding for planning and right away and those kinds of things that doesn't commit $150 million at this point to the project.
let's hear what the folks online have to say. We have Chris, then Brian, then Jamie. Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is helpful for me in that previous view of the overall and then turning it on and turning it off was great. And the discussion with regard to this project sort of highlights for me, I totally understand all the variables that go into and that will go into sort of deciding as a committee what sort of makes the list and what doesn't make the list. And I would offer, in my view, this is sort of how I will likely approach this, but I offer for the committee that final check, because there's lots of interests and variables associated with people deciding what makes the list and what doesn't make the list. I would offer as a way to approach this to help to make the decisions for all of us is the final check has to be regionality. And so it doesn't focus on the amount being spent. It focuses on the impacts to the region. This is a regional effort, right? Regional dollars. Let's not lose sight of that regionality as a key component of defensibility for the projects we select. In my mind, that is the most important test. Ultimately, it's not that all portions of the region get a piece. That's not regionality. It is that the monies that are raised via this tax are going to those projects that will have a benefit to the region. That's the test in my mind. And so I suggest that that should be the final check. We're all going to have sort of interest in various projects and listen to people who say that this is a hugely important project. But I offer that the final check on all of that process should ultimately be, what is the regional impact of this project, and is it defensible from that perspective? Thanks, Chair.
Okay, good point. Thanks. And to some extent, that's what we've been about for the last 5 years as we've developed from those 108 projects, which were supposed to be regional, right? That was the request of this committee to all the jurisdictions, and the further reduction of that by 2/3 also needed to have that. And as we've been saying along, and as Chris just eloquently restated it, it needs always to be something that we're considering. So thanks for that, Chris. Brian.
Mr. Chair, if you would actually, before we get too far away from this Vail topic, I'd like to, I don't know if this is what he's going to talk about, but maybe let Jamie go first and come back to me. I just know Jamie's hand went up talking about it. He lived and worked in that, or he lives in and worked in that area. So while it's top of mind, maybe Jamie go first.
All right. Go ahead, Jamie.
Thanks, Brian. Hey, so I guess a couple of things with this. I know it's a heavy project. It's 160 million, but I think we need to go back to how many projects were cut to get here. I echo the regional thing that Chris talked about. This project represents 2 jurisdictions in our region, with the potential for a third, with the Vail incorporation process going on. Regional also means letting people get through the region. There's, with the Rocking K, with Del Webb at 2,400 homes, Rocking K is right now 2,500 homes, but the county has authorized up to 4,800 homes for that. That's a significant part of the region. So we really need to do something about that. There is no transit opportunities in this area. So I think we have to balance that out. So I think this thing is pretty critical. The major bottleneck is over those railroad tracks. And it will continue to be. When I lived on the northwest side of town, Ina Road, without that railroad track overpass, was always an impediment, much as it is at Coachella right now. The traffic volumes are increasing, and it's just a huge bottleneck, and something needs to be done. If we go back to my prior occupation, life safety wise, when you're waiting for 5 to 7 minutes because there's 69 trains a day that comes through that section, and there's 2 tracks, and especially the outbound train is extremely slow because of the geography where they have to slow down to take a curve. Waiting 5 to 7 minutes in an ambulance when somebody's having a heart attack on the other side truly is the difference between life and death. So I think we need to factor all these things in. I have heard some concerns about historical preservation if it maintains the current alignment with there's a shrine there that's 100 years old, and there's efforts to rehabilitate the old post office as well. So I think there are some concerns about that, but I'm wondering if there's, what other alternatives there are. I know years ago, they talked about doing an alignment that basically went straight down Camino Loma Alta. So, I mean, we've got to do something to release pressure out of these areas. The traffic is ridiculous, and it does affect my ability to get into the Tucson and to Marana and Oro Valley and most of my neighbors. So I think this is one of the things. I know it's a big target because it's the most expensive project, single most expensive. So it's easier to kind of go after those first, but that may not be the best approach. So I guess we need something. I mean, out in this area, it's growing. This is where the county is pushing the growth. So we need to support that. But that's all I want to add. And I'll defer back to Brian. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, when we toggled between the selected projects and all projects, it really gives a visual of how concentrated those projects get into the core of the metropolitan area. I took a what I think to be a common sense approach when I filled out the survey of, I deferred to the experts in each of the regions, and I Tucson, Pima County, Marana, Oro Valley, Sarita, Pasco Yaqui, South Tucson. I put all their number ones down first, and then I went to the number twos, and then the number threes, which in some cases, like Oro Valley only has twos. So Oro Valley didn't have any more projects. And I went down to try to, one, defer to the experts, the traffic engineers who say, these are where our biggest problems are and where we believe we need to fix things. But additionally, to spread these things out throughout the region. I don't know how we go to the voters when Oro Valley has 0 projects. Pasco Yaqui has 0 projects. Sarita, I think I saw, had 0 projects. Marana's down to 1 project. It's not a region-wide plan that the voters are going to approve if we concentrate everything kind of to the core. So I understand the dollars and cents, but that regional approach, I don't know that people appreciate. There's a lot of people who live on the outskirts of town and they do vote. And if they don't have projects, much to what Jamie was saying, we've already cut several projects from Vale area and left them this one. If we cut this one now, we've essentially throughout this 3-year process, taken everything off the board from them and leave them with nothing. We cannot expect that they're going to vote in favor of this plan. And then this plan is going to fail and nobody is going to get anything. So I think we have to go back to that regional approach. And I would recommend going back to those subject matter experts. That's not to say defer to them solely, but I do lean upon their judgment and try to take their highest ranked projects and start with those in an even manner. So that's my input on this.
Okay, thank you, Brian. I have, Moss and then
Thanks, Tom. Well, I just want to first say that I really appreciate this conversation about regionality, Chris. So spot on and such a good anchor point. And I don't have anything specific on this project. I do just want to kind of speak to, the recognition of, I agree. Oro Valley has to have a project in here. We got to move on that. I think part of the reason that we're seeing this whittling away and focus on projects in, the core of our region is because that's kind of right. It's the core for a reason. That's how people are moving through it. And so I totally appreciate what you just said and agree with you. I just, I think there's also that context of thinking about how do we connect these things up if we know that people are also moving through the city of Tucson or through other communities to, get across the region. That, for example, it's easier to go through up 22nd Street or Speedway from Harrison and Broadway area than it is to go to the I-10. So there's a lot of considerations when you're thinking about where people are entering the system and how they're going to be moving across our region that we need to factor in. And 4,800 homes is nothing to sniff at, but it's also, there's over 200,000 homes in the core of city Tucson alone. And so it is still helps to put it in perspective why some of this is happening. And I guess my question specific to this project is, where are people going? Are they using the I-10 to get downtown to the U of A? Are they going south and east? Which does seem like an only option is really the I-10 in that case. So I'm just also trying to be curious, to some of the questions about, are there alternatives? It could help us think about that as far as where are people going when they're using this route.
okay, all good points.
Mr. Chair, Brian Keeley.
Go ahead, Brian. I see.
It's hard. I don't mean to interrupt. I don't. So if you want me to hold off, I most certainly will. It's hard in the online dialogue. I'm sorry I can't be there in person, but to have some of the open conversation back and forth would be good. So if I could address something that Moss just said, and I welcome her reply to it, just in the manner of conversation. I'd like to bring up one of the points she just mentioned, if you're okay with it.
Please, that's what we're aiming for, is to have a conversation and becomes a debate, maybe even better.
Perfect. I just, out of respect for your position, I wanted to broach that first. I mean, I guess the one thing I would say is I grew up in the heart of the city of Tucson. That's where I spent half my life. I was born and raised in this town. I certainly understand the struggles down there. Because of my family, I moved more to the northwest side of town at this point. And I understand you're saying that there's the core people and the density is certainly there. There's no doubt about it in the city of Tucson. 2 points I'd like to mention, though, is this is a 20-year plan. And when we think, I know 4,000 homes, to some may seem like a lot, to some may not, but the point I would say is on these outskirts, that's where the growth is going. And 20 years from now, if we don't address these problems, it's going to be catastrophic in those areas. So I see a lot of this as planning for the future. But the other part is there are certain stores or shops or restaurants or things in the city of Tucson that aren't available, maybe where I live. And I would love to go there and shop at them. The city of Tucson, I'm sure, would love to have my sales tax money to come down out of where I live and come into the city of Tucson and eat and dine and shop and do all those things. But if it's so problematic to get from the outskirts of town into the core, that personally deters me from wanting to go down and do that. So I appreciate the fact that I'm not saying there's not an issue in the city of Tucson as far as meeting the demand and the capacity. But if you don't bridge the gap between the outliers, which is where all the growth is happening, and that metropolitan core, then you're gonna struggle to bring the people from the surrounding region into the city to shop and dine and entertainment and everything else. So, as a conversational piece, I just want to bring that up. That's why I think this balance, needs to be struck somewhere throughout the region to help someone like me flow from the northwest side of town down into the city of Tucson, or vice versa. Someone like you, who I'm making an assumption here, I think you live within city limits, but to move maybe from there to Marana or to Vail or to Oro Valley from time to time for something. So I just throw that out there just as someone who's lived here my entire life. And I'd be curious what your opinion is on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Brian, and totally hear you. I agree with you. Right. I think it's a very natural thing. You're spot on, the city, and I would love for you to come down and dine here and everything like that. So totally, we're on the same page with that. I think what I can foresee voters also questioning, and that what I hear a lot about from folks when I talk to them about the RTA, is concerns about investments that will just enable further sprawl. And because people see that as a huge concern with water access, with air quality, natural, environmental spaces, wildlife habitat, all of these other things. And so, and I think we're going to get into a philosophical conversation in that sense about, how and where we should develop as a region. And I don't see Arlen online, but I'm sure he could talk to us about land use and transit, transportation planning, and how that goes hand in hand. And so I think that's just the other side of the coin. When we're especially, I think you brought up voters too, about needing to have something to get buy-in from all communities. And I agree with that. It's, on the flip side, there's also this concern among voters that if we continue to put infrastructure into places, that all that will do is just proliferate greater growth in areas where we might not be able to sustain it in the long term, financially, ecologically, economically. And so I think that's just something that we need to take into consideration when we're balancing those two perspectives. And so some might say in that an alternative to doing certain road projects would be more like an investment in high capacity transit from the peripheries so that folks could have different types of access. And you know, I heard Jamie mention that there's no transit there that would provide that as an option. And I think that's a huge miss and, you know, part of where these constraints are coming into play. So, but I totally appreciate your perspective. People need to be able to get around and need to be able to come in and move through spaces. And it's a hard topic. And again, I don't have any bones to pick, particularly with this project, just to make that very, very clear.
Thanks, Moss. And to a great extent, that gets into area that isn't our purview, unfortunately, or fortunately. Much of the existing zoning and development regulations are in place. They've been enacted by all the governments of the area, and we can't change those. I mean, we can try to, you know, as an example, try to put forward a proposal to the voters that doesn't widen any streets, and we've done this in the past. We've had to come to the point where a balanced project, a balanced plan is the only thing that can get a balanced, positive approval from voters. So, well, you know, I understand where you're coming from, Moss. I also think that part of what we have to be here is pragmatists about what the existing and legally, you know, established future of our region is, and try to react to that. Brian, did you have? I saw you took your hand down.
Yeah,
Some more
the only thing I would echo to that, Mr. Chair, is that my fear counter to that is, to your point, these regions that are growing are not going to stop growing. They have the ability to grow. People want to go there. The zoning, as you pointed out, is complete. What I worry about more is that the region turns into a bunch of silos because we haven't developed, you know, multimodal methods of traffic across the region. And so much like I do, not because I prefer it, but because it's easiest, I don't really tend to go far outside my region, whether I'd like to or not. If it's that inconvenient, then I won't do it. And that's my fear, is 20 years from now, these outlying areas will continue to grow. But areas, all of these towns, county, municipalities, they're going to get more and more isolated and siloed off because it's too difficult to travel from one area to another. And so with that, sir, thank you. I yield back.
Okay, I've got Dale and then Bruce and then Edmund.
I'll make several comments. One is balance is what I'm asking for, and I'm not, I want a project out there that is proportionate with what we can do. And to me, this project as it's set is extreme. And in relationship to the available resources that we have. And yes, these areas are going to continue to grow. You know, I mean, I lived on the Far East Side since I moved here in 1963. So, you know, I'm not unfamiliar with that. And we own businesses on the Far East Side. My father-in-law was the chief ranger at Soar National Park. So, I mean, we know all of these issues. We've seen these issues develop, and they're going to continue to be here. But we need balance. And the other thing we need to understand about this particular area is that they're kind of handicapped in this area to a degree. You know, Marana has two major intersections that are major overpasses that can go in. Marana is willing to come up with $100 million apiece to help support those intersections to get there. And that's because Marana has developed, and they've, as a community, they have their own sales tax and they have their own tax sources, and they're willing to do some of those things. And obviously, also the Marana ones are on the freeway And I think there's some ADOT money involved in this. But my point here is that what we need, and all I'm asking the staff for, is to see if we don't have some options where we still have a project here that is not quite so off the scope of far as money. I'd also like to point out, if you look at the two different projects, Sarita has a project in both lists, and they're different projects. And La Valida is in the second list, is actually in, and it was their number one request. And so I think we need to go, that kind of ties in with what our chairman has been saying about the requests priorities. Oro Valley needs to have a project. There was one in my list, unfortunately, and I think there is one also in the shorter list of the 14 or 15 people list. Yes, Oro Valley, Lambert Lane got into that list. So I think we still have things to work on to work out how that does. But I do think a project needs to be there just to get votes. And my concern is, how do we make these projects proportionate and rational with the rest of the plan?
Okay, Bruce, are you going to speak specifically about this one?
Yes.
Okay, good. Because I want to move on to some of the other ones. Thanks, Dale. You just brought up La Villita and the other Sarita project, which might be something for us to discuss, but also in general, how the committee feels about bringing back some of these projects, or moving or swapping projects that have higher priority within the jurisdiction. So go ahead, Bruce.
So Chris's comments about regionality and the importance of what are the most important regional projects really resonates with me. I guess the question is, does this project rise to one of those projects? And I guess I'd put an exclamation point on what Jaime said. If you look at what's currently within the proposed boundaries of the town of Vail, there are 25,000 people. They are served by a woefully inadequate congested roadway system. That area has been ignored in terms of roadway investments for a long period of time. It hasn't had the kind of attention that Marana or Oro Valley or Sarita has. The 4,800 homes that we're talking about is not 20 years from now. We're talking about those homes being brought online in the next 5 years. That's another 12 to 15,000 people. So you're going to have a community of 40,000 people that has a very, right now, inadequate road system, only to get worse. So I just hope that the committee will take that into consideration. I understand what Dale's saying. I think we ought to look at options and so on, but I think a strong case could be made for this project.
Thank you. Edmund, are you wanting to talk specifically about this one, or do you have a general comment?
It relates. It's more general. I'm just gonna, if you don't mind, I'll just get it out real quick. What's that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. I love the fact that we're finally talking balance. I've actually stayed quiet in these meetings for a while because I think we've had a lack of balance as we've come forward with a transit heavy plan. Tomorrow in the Tucson City Council meeting, the city of Tucson is going to roll out the next draft project list from the city manager's office. I mean, good on them. They're basically planting their flag and saying, you know, this is what it looks like when we have 65% of the funding from RTA, which is equivalent to the 65% of the sales tax that we generate. I think the city has an opportunity to have more of a regional approach, more of a greater good approach. But they're staking their, in a way, staking their claim for the 65%. I get it. It's a strong strategic move. However, I think this really puts the TMC back to negotiation when you've got two strong city management officials on the TMC. I think really we're going to continue to beat our list up, but in the end, the RTA board wants to see us with a plan that looks close to what the TMC comes up with. And I think the TMC has got to go back and negotiate once the city of Tucson rolls this thing out. I agree with the comments that have been said. Product wise, as we go forward to the voters and try to win this election, because, you know, whether it's a transit heavy plan or not, we're screwed if we don't move forward with an RTA in the future. We have to have a plan, but again, it should be a plan that's a high quality product with a regional perspective. To Bruce's perspective with his thoughts on Vale, right on. Oro Valley, right on. We will lose all those votes, and this will go down like the Pima County vote years ago on infrastructure, right? I think Pima County is probably cognizant and a bit gun shy, wanting to make sure that we as a CAC group are together as one. I'll say bluntly, I'm not for this heavy transit plan. I'll vote no for it. I'm glad we're talking balance, but I do think we need to completely revisit this once this is rolled out. The city of Tucson RTA next draft project list is rolled out tomorrow in the city council meeting. And this ad hoc committee between TMC and CAC will be vital after they get done negotiating.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. Let me just ask a quick question, Carolyn, before I get to you. I'd like to know if the committee in general supports prioritizing individual jurisdictional projects based upon those entities' own internal priority. As an example, La Villita, which appears on one of the lists and not on the other, versus the other project. I forgot. Mine Road has a higher priority from them. If it comes down to switching, and same thing with Oro Valley, where Lambert Lane is actually a lower priority than Shannon Road. Are you comfortable with making those kinds of swaps in that event?
Yes.
Okay, it's unanimous. Mel just voted yes.
Tom, if I can add, the TMC and the ad hoc group through their framework discussions had updated. So the ranking in here represents the original 108, if I'm correct. So that would need to be folded in as what they're updated through their framework exercises and what that priority may or may not be. So we want to make sure those were blended in, as they're taken into account.
You do have the framework, so the priority that's in the framework is their most recent priority.
That's true.
And that reflects then also the priority, Barb, make sure I say this correctly, of the specific categories, with capacity being the most priority or the highest priority. Then I think it was operational, then new. Yeah. So it's, they've gone through that exercise.
Combined them as we attempted to do with our exercise.
And they did that
That'll be something
after
to
this effort. So this was the original, and then that's been a modified version of it that they've been working.
So we can pull up the framework just to show you where it is, but but you were correct. So in case of Sahuarita, number 1, number 2, those are already communicated to us. We have that information. Same thing with Oro Valley. We know which one is their number 1. That has not changed. They confirmed that at the last TMC meeting.
All right.
To make it clear on Oro Valley, it's Shannon is their priority.
Could you pull up the spreadsheet just to be clear? So this is the framework on the spreadsheet. And then you got the sponsors' priorities, just to answer the question and show everybody where it is. So the column you see in green, that's the column that's sponsors' priority. And then if you don't mind, look up the 2 Oro Valley projects.
So Lambert Lane as a capacity project is a highest priority for them, and capacity is a higher priority over operational for the whole ad hoc group for the TMC's framework. So Lambert would actually be a higher priority using that methodology.
Yeah, if you use that. At the TMC meeting, though, the Oro Valley representative was quite clear that Shannon was a higher priority overall to them. So that just puts further information, or it further validates, I guess, what I'm saying about the relative priorities needing to be evaluated within the team.
If you don't mind, just to make sure we're clear. So Oro Valley's 2 projects in the green column, which one is number 1?
Number 1 is the
Shannon. Correct. And that's what they said at the TMC meeting. So that's to answer your question. Shannon is their number 1, Lambert is their number 2.
Well, which column are you looking at?
Green is all.
They both say one.
Yeah, they both say one. It's with that respective category.
Yeah, in the category.
In that
So
category.
in the capacity, which is ranked higher than the operational.
Yeah.
Lambert is their number one priority by definition. It gets to your point. If they said Shannon is overall more important as a Oro Valley project, then that's a slight disconnect than saying the capacity.
I know, I'm gonna defer to those jurisdictions because their number one priority is also their only project.
In some
And it
cases.
might be their 100th priority of all projects. As we'll find out from how the city has been talking about organizing its priorities. So we'll let that continue to be an argument. 'Cause we need something to argue about. Let's see, Brian. Or do I have somebody in here that I continue to, or,
But I just raised my hand
all
recently.
right, we'll get to it.
No, continue.
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, to this same topic, based on the exercise I performed, I'd be curious if staff could do the same thing so we could see where the funding breakover is. But again, I went through each jurisdiction and put their number ones down in order, and then each jurisdiction their number twos, and then number threes, and so on. And some of them, like Oro Valley and Pasco Yaqui, obviously they fell off quick because they only have one or two recommendations left. But to run through that and see where that breakover point is, because again, they're getting ranked in order, and we're hitting each jurisdiction as we go along so that it's equitable. Obviously, someone like the city of Tucson will have many more projects get done than Oro Valley, but it doesn't mean we're having to pick just between one in Oro Valley or two in Oro Valley, where I think both could be done. Is that a project that staff could do and share with us?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Brian, we'll have all that for the ad hoc working group as well. So again, as Rick just described, they've done that exercise, but we'll take another stab at it to make sure it's clear.
Thank you.
So essentially what you're talking about is largely the way that I also approached the exercise, and that's to essentially take all the number ones and all the number twos, and then at that point, see where you are as far as your budget, and then come down the list. The city and city of Tucson and Pima County, I think largely were the only ones that went beyond three in terms of the number of priorities that they had. So
Yes, sir. And in doing so, yes, we're not picking between just one Oro Valley project or the other. I'm just using them as an example. Tucson will still have more projects than Oro Valley will. But I don't think we should be talking about these outliers and, well, which one project do we give them? I think it just makes it more equitable across the board to at least go through that exercise and see where the breakover point is on funding.
So, Mr. Chair, again, just to make sure everybody's reading the spreadsheet, it's exactly as you described, Brian. It lumps all the number one projects and then all the number twos, all the number threes, and then there's even a total cost for each one of them. So we'll clean this up and send it out again, just so everybody can take a look at it with that perspective. And between now and when the ad hoc group meets again, if there's any updates, we'll ask for the sponsors to provide their updates as well. But the spreadsheet is intended to do exactly what you described, Brian.
thank you. Chris and then Kevin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As this discussion about regional, sub-regional, local jurisdiction priorities highlights, I think that process and relying on that for a CAC perspective was fraught with peril. Because, like has been pointed out by Brian and others, the prioritization of a project from a regionality standpoint might lend itself to, okay, none of your projects reach the level of regional impact that we as a PAG, RTA, and regional dollars want to spend our money on. And the other point that I want to make with regard to the prioritization of these projects is money is fungible. So if a community's number 2 project makes the list and goes to the voters, that frees up local money to go towards that number 1 priority that they've identified on the list. Thanks.
Okay, Kevin?
Yeah, I was just gonna mention 2 Ore Valley projects. I live very close to Shannon, and that one would actually benefit me greatly.
Oh,
But
well, then it's in.
but the Lambert Lane one is right now. Lambert Lane's 4-lane road, and then it tapers down to 2. This would complete the corridor. I think it would be done, if you will. So I think that would be a very beneficial project. So if it was me picking one Ore Valley project, it would probably be Lambert, but I'm fine with the taking the jurisdiction's recommendation as well. The other one I wanted to mention is just the Orange Grove project. Similar situation. It's the last one in the corridor, the entire corridor from I-10 all the way up to where's the next Sunrise.
Ultimately Skyline, yeah.
Skyline. Yeah, I can't remember where it changes. Anyhow, all I-10 all the way up to Skyline. That's the very last section that needs to be done. Orange Grove would be done. So I would advocate for certainly that one. Make it that. That was it.
Thanks, Tom. One question that's been kind of rattling in my brain throughout this whole exercise is what budget are we trying to reconcile here to? Because in the budget proposal that we had previously moved forward, there's really about $977 million for roadway projects. And I noticed that there's, that seems to be really the focus here, since there's no high capacity transit projects are included in the list that we were asked to rank or prioritize. But it looks like the number that we've been trying to work up to is the 1.2 for named projects overall. So I'm just also a little bit unclear about how, say we do go through this tough challenge of whittling this down further, are we setting ourselves up to have to cut even harder to get down to what we've actually allocated in our framework for new roadway projects?
Yeah, thanks for reminding everyone. That's what I tried to lead off the conversation, letting people know that somewhere around 980 million, thank you for the exact number, 977, is currently what is left, is what the June 25th proposal from this group was before we added the extra 10th of a cent. And so while the exercise that we performed is one that takes us down to the TMC $1.1 billion limit, if the committee wants to go beyond, you need to be able to see what that impact is. And so, yes, we're from our perspective, we're doing both those things.
Okay.
One is to get rid of or to move to the reserve list those projects which we just don't have money for. And then the second part of the exercise is if we choose to take more of that money and spread it into the categorical elements, mostly in transit, then there's another impact, and as a group need to face that and support or modify or reject that. And that's the process that we're going through.
Got it. Sorry if I missed that. I joined a bit late. I guess to one thing that's been just rattling in my brain also is kind of reflecting on my experience with doing this exercise. I did hear you, Tom, kind of acknowledging early on that there are some, like there's great inconsistencies between the two lists that were produced. And for me, if I'm kind of thinking through why that might be, part of it could have been the order of operations with how the tool and exercise were, like laid out in the system. So the way and maybe I'm just the oddball here, but the way it presented to me was that I was first asked to put them in order of rank, and then I hit save, and then that all my ranking selections just kind of went away, or that wasn't apparent to me anymore in the screen, and I had no way to toggle back to that screen. I still can't toggle back to it. And then, so I couldn't make reference to what I had ranked originally. And then I was just left with the selection pages, which is what I can only access right now, and then selected projects from there. So I think this is I think like the idea behind this exercise, or maybe what I think is the intent of this exercise, is really helpful. And I appreciate kind of us doing homework and then coming back together and trying to reconcile it. I think I guess I just wonder if that was kind of a similar flow for everyone else, if maybe we're just working with some bad data and we need to try to work to maybe like redo this in a sense of where it's a different kind of flow. And some of the information likewise that was missing for me was information about how we had previously ranked it. I saw definitely the jurisdictional ranks, but not how our committee had ranked it. So that could be an addition if we did this again. But then having it really be like, how do we get to, the way I would have maybe designed this personally is setting it up so that we select the projects that we want to balance to the budget that we're trying to meet. At this time, I would recommend a more conservative budget, so around that 980 million. And then from there, prioritize the projects within that selection so that Tom, how I would balance the budget, what my priorities are, and then we could like look at those lists together or as a group, right? And see how it all kind of comes together, because at least then we're building on the same information rather than starting from a list over. And then we still have that reserve where, if there are decisions down the road to do something different with the budget, that we would have kind of that contingency of what you were just describing. So I just wonder, I just want to put it out there that maybe the data that we got from this exercise isn't the best, and we might want to reorder the operations to get us better data to have these kinds of conversations.
I might ask Peter if he has any opinion about that. From my perspective, I wouldn't be surprised if you were not correct. But I also think before we do another go round of this process, perhaps with the slight change that you were suggesting, we get that feedback from the TMC. Peter, what's your thought about the validity of the data and kind of the process that?
Mr. Chair, I think it would have been helpful to have a tutorial on the pages before we release them. In any case, the process itself is what it is. It's people went in there and they selected the projects they wanted and also ranked them the way they wanted to. So as far as they're saving them the way they wanted, that's really just sort of locked in for that perspective.
Yeah, and I think Masher thought about ranking only the ones that you selected. I can understand that, and that probably has a little bit to do with the difference in what you see, between these two lists. But we'll keep after it. Dale?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of follow up somewhat on what Moss was saying, also somewhat about Lambert Lane. Totally irrelevant, but as an East Sider, I think Lambert Lane is more important, so. Just tongue in cheek, sorry about. But I did want to point out that, you know, when we talk about these projects and, you know, the relevance of them, Sarita had a very low request to begin with. Sarita, both of their projects is $70 million total. And I can see there's a regional standpoint. From a regional standpoint, Pima Mine Road may be more important, but it's literally on the north boundary of the town. And La Valita goes right through the center of the town. So I can see the pros and cons of both of them. And, you know, but overall, you're only looking at $70 million if we include both of them. And I'm not saying that that there's an amount that each city should get. That's not the point. Because I think the regional fall in is important. My concern about
And as a reminder, half of the budget is actually in the categoricals, so benefits to the region don't stop at the corridor project.
Absolutely,
They
that's
just
it.
start there.
That's, I was gonna go with that too, is that, you know, those, and I'm gonna go a little history here, there, you know, I don't know how many intersection improvements, you know, and we don't know how many intersection improvements per se have taken place in the city of Tucson. There were 2 or 3 really expensive ones when it started under, you know, and then to my knowledge, there haven't been a lot of intersection improvements in the city of Tucson, although I think there have been some. And so that we need to keep in mind.
So, Mr. Chair, if I may, going back to your earlier point, Dale, so Sarita and both Oro Valley and Sarita, if you recall, they came back to this committee and they removed their lower priority projects as a good faith effort to demonstrate to you that the ones they have left are their highest priorities. So just keep that in mind.
And so I think, and for far as the overall exercise here, I think it is about us getting questions and thinking about this process and how do we want to make that decision that we know is coming down the road. And you know, that's what I'm after here, is to try to refine what it is we need to consider and what we want from the staff to make that final decision. So,
Yeah, and the feedback from TMC as we continue to harp on it. Yeah. Carolyn.
Carolyn, yes, I can't, there we go. Well, first one is just an observation, I guess. But Chris has brought up a couple of times about you know, how he defines regionality, and people were agreeing with them. But then it seems that, you know, benefit to the entire region. And then it seems like people agree, but we continue to define regionality in our own way. Like, you know, Jamie said he agreed with it, but then he went on to say that there's a lot of people here in Vail. And so that is that regionality, because people need to get in and out of there. And I'm not making a point either way. And then most of us continue to go back to define regionality as a little bit for every part of town or for every jurisdiction. So it seems like it would be good to agree on a definition, or even more than one definition, of what regionality is, if that's really what we're looking at, are these truly regional projects. Because I think Kevin said, or somebody said it really well about it could be a project that was number 1 or number 2, but you know, does that make it a regional project? So like I said, it was an observation. Another thing as far as history is, we're talking about the county in the current zoning. Well, after the Sonoran Desert Conservation Plan became part of the comprehensive land use plan back in 2002, the county went through a big process to downplan the southeast area in their southeast area plan, which is the Rincon Valley. So Because a lot of that zoning was really inappropriate and was done in the 60s and 70s. And I wish Arlen was here. I don't know if Carmine is there, but so a lot of those, it's not current zoning out in Vale. These are new zoning requests that come in and they get either approved or they don't get approved. But we're not, and they went through a broad community effort and the Board of Supervisors downplanned that whole area. That's kind of neither here nor there, but I thought I'd want to bring it up. So the last thing though, Mr. Chair, is this is a really, really good discussion. I don't know if we're going to get anywhere before we're done in terms of giving any different kind of list or prioritization to the TMC ad hoc, which is meeting in just like a week or two. So I'm wondering, is it just the discussion we're going to be sharing with them? We're really not trying to reorder any lists at this meeting. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I really feel like without that input from TMC, we're going to be in the dark. So I don't see us trying to actually hit that, except hear the argument. To hear the argument from both sides about some of these various issues that will be coming up. And so far, I can tell you that on behalf of your CAC representatives, this has been terrific. It's been really helpful to be able to communicate what some of those opinions are on even both sides. I think it's important stuff that needs to be considered as they and we try to come to grips with this difficult process.
Okay, well, I just want to follow up with one question, and I guess I would ask Farhad with this discussion of regionality. Is there a way, Farhad, that you can, in all these different discussions I was talking about, how does the RTA board or the RTA staff or whatever, can you say exactly what regionality means to you? Is it what Chris was saying about having a regional benefit to all of us in the region?
Sure, Mr. Chair and Councilman. As you all know, we've been having this discussion for a while, and I think everybody understands that it's not one specific definition. It's really more comprehensive. And I go back to what Chris said as well. It's more comprehensive on benefits and the impact to the region as a whole. So, and if you recall, we've had this discussion several times that you can't come back with a numeric definition of benefit per se. So it is somewhat subjective, but at the same time, we have the data that demonstrates and we have the policies that obviously supports where the growth is happening, where it's going to happen within the next 20 years. So it is more of a comprehensive and somewhat subjective discussion about the benefit and the impact to the region. And I like how Chris defined it. And I would end by saying, really, we're asking you to help us define what that regional impact is. And you're doing that. You're having those conversations. And the TMC and the ad hoc group are going to talk about, and I want to echo what Tom said earlier, they're going to talk about those 5 points that you've been talking about as well. And ultimately, what we hope is between the ad hoc group and the TMC and the CAC, ultimately we land on what we believe has the most benefit and the impact to the region.
In other words,
I agree. That's what I'm saying. We're asking you all to help us define that. So I don't think there's one definition that we all would agree to, but there's one product that I hope most of us would agree to, which is the plan itself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn. Moss.
Thanks, Tom. And I appreciate that definition, Farhad, of benefits and impact to the region as a whole. And I think it just reminded me of kind of the point I made earlier about Tucson voters and their perspective about how their tax dollars are getting spent throughout the region. And water and climate change are huge issues. And, we see that in the climate action plan, we see that in the priorities of the mayor and council. And it's not just because, the mayor and council are pulling this out of their hat. It's driven by a lot of the planning and public outreach that the city has been doing over the last 5 years. And so with that, I just want to, because in some ways I do hear us pivoting towards the constant question of what are voters going to support. And I really look forward to working with this committee to finding a balanced plan, and figuring out how to get as overwhelming support throughout our region to support a plan. But I think we do have to acknowledge that, a majority of voters live in the city limits and are driving the policies that are centering water conservation and denser development, less sprawl, and things that are, that get us, that help to address climate change. And having an ever-present conversation is that people don't want to have more RTA dollars going to build out infrastructure that's just going to, eat up our natural spaces. And so, if I just want us to make sure that we're holding that very clear and present as we go and as folks talk to the TMC and as we make these discussions, that this will absolutely die by Tucson voters if we're not being cognizant of those priorities, because Tucson will turn around and do something different if they want to, and will need to, because of how they see that kind of dire implication for how we're going to invest in infrastructure over the next 20 years, especially at this really critical and pivotal time for our globe, right? And so I just hope we don't really lose that. And I think that benefits and impacts to the region as a whole is so important, because it's all connected, right? Just because we develop some kind of desert land, untouched desert area somewhere else, doesn't mean it's not impacting all of us, right? That's carbon, that's air quality, that's species displacement. And so I think we really need to be thoughtful of how all that hangs together. And I do just have to say that, right, I've heard comments about what our framework is being transit heavy. And I just need to name that only 30% of the budget currently is being proposed to go towards transit. 50%, over 50% is proposed to go towards roadways and cars. And so I just think we all need to really sit here and let that sink in, and that doesn't even reflect a lot of what I'm hearing and what is reflected in the planning documents from the city of Tucson about the priorities that Tucson voters see in our community. So it's, we're hard position. I'm really energized by this conversation. I think it's been really wonderful. But I just hope we don't lose sight of that elephant that's in the room as far as the priorities of Tucson voters. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I would just suggest that those priorities are reflected in our guiding principles, as well as in what the plan that we've been working on is looking like at this point. I think all those concerns that you have and hopes for the type of plan that will be presented to the voters is well on its way from the work that we've been doing. But I would also remind everyone that this draft plan will go before the public for intensive feedback and education, in the coming months through the beginning of here. And so there's the board will have a lot of really good polling information, as well as just feedback about what do we expect will be the amount of support for this plan. And I'm sure that it, like last time, the board will make some changes to reflect exactly what that feedback looks like. Thanks, everyone, for your input today. One other area that I wanted to ask you to look at is the non-RTA contributions. Some of these projects have leveraging ability that I'd like to hear what you feel about the importance of that being in the plan, both in terms of making our bucks go farther, but also being able to build more projects perhaps, and to make a case to the public that, you know, it's not just going to be about a half-cent sales tax that ultimately gets that. What was our number? 7% of the need.
Of the RMAP, 6%.
6%. Sorry.
Local, right?
It's all about a very important decision by the voters, but it's also about 6% of our regional needs. Bruce.
Because I know we've talked about this over the course, but is it possible for us to get a list of those projects that have a significant opportunity to leverage other dollars into them?
I think it's shown on our spreadsheet there by non-RTA funds
So
on our. that
so if I
column.
may describe that, Mr. Chair, Bruce, so those are identified by individual sponsors. Some of them are impact fees based on their impact fee ordinances. So those are the smaller amounts you see. The larger amounts you see were recommended through the TMC process by using non-RTA regional funds through the PAG process. So they're all shown on that table. I would say any one of them that identifies a penny of non-RTA dollar is helpful. So if you want anything further, let us know. We'll drill down deeper, but anything that shows any non-RTA dollar obviously leverages other funds.
But I can do this myself. I was just thinking if we could take them and ranking them from the largest contribution of that amount of money down. So we saw which projects, it's hard to sort all this out through
Yeah.
30 some projects.
Yeah, we have the spreadsheet on the framework, so we can actually have a version that sorts it that way as well. That's fine. We can do that.
This would be insightful. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, so Peter is our master spreadsheet helper, so we'll ask him to help with that.
Interesting. It's good thought. Dale.
Just to follow up on what Bruce is saying and to make my point, the two state route projects are looking for $25 million apiece, and one of them is a $350 million project, and we want 25 million. And the other one is a basically 200 million or $193 million project with $25 million. And yeah, I mean, that's something, and it's a core project in the core of the community that deals with regional mobility in the biggest way. And you could make the argument that's a significant contribution to the people out in Vail, because it'll be directly related to their ability to be able to enter the city.
But Mr. Chairman, it goes back to my earlier point about sort of matrix analysis, is we can sort of line these all against each other and then start to evaluate their significance vis-a-vis one another. It's hard to see them all as discrete and then try to pull them together ourselves to talk about all these projects. So
that's a heavy lift, but we'll give it our best shot. All right. Any other comments? I'm sorry, Rio and all the others that have been here listening to talk about roadways and nothing about transit. Was there anything that you wanted to add? I would like to remind folks of all the great information that has been provided to us about transit ridership and the needs and how those are layered, the impact of the COA on that those very things. The enormous amount of need, as we would expect, that can be demonstrated for like $3 billion from the stuff that I saw, and maybe it's even more. And how much of that are we likely to be able to impact, and how much have we actually been impacting it through RTA1? Those are all important things. There anything you'd like to add to us or point out to us?
Speaker, thank you. Not at this time. I appreciate all the patience that the committee has had in collecting the data and disseminating it. Be sure to pay special attention to the memos that were in this meeting's packet. And unless my colleague Ledford has anything he'd like to add, I think we're good for today.
Hello, everyone, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Adam Ledford. I'm a management analyst. Part of why we added this up to the packet today was just to make sure that we had ridership questions answered. And we know that the CSE frequently asks for things. And so we wanted to potentially take the opportunity to make sure that we were satisfying the questions that you have as a body. Just quick notes, I would like to address one metric that you won't see in there. And I think to paraphrase Mel, and I hope I'm getting this fairly right, sometimes we've been asked about the comparative metrics for evaluating regional fixed route subcategories. So urban versus express versus rural routes. And quite simply, the reason why we haven't provided that is that no single point metric really exists that's adequate or in a good faith evaluation, a way to look at these very disparate services. Just as a quick example, if we look at cost per ridership or subsidy per ridership, which would be the temptation to use, that makes some assumptions that different operating groups for different vehicles have the same measure of cost accounting and cost reporting, which we know is probably not true because we have different agencies running those. So even the numbers that you might see on monthly operating reports are going to be different. Also, the needs that are served by the different individual route strategies vary wildly. So the good news is that there is a single point resource that does exist to do this, and that's really the long range plan. So without bringing complex multivariate analyses into this room, that is really where the heavy lifting is done to try to make sure that there is a balance, a spectrum, if you will, of considerations that are given rather than that single point metric. So I just wanted to, in full transparency, acknowledge that we have heard that question asked, but it's a very difficult one to answer without really leaning heavily on Jeanette's team and the modelers and the data scientists that are examining and evaluating all of those things as they must be considered and improved. With that, do want to open the floor as well. Are there any outstanding transit questions? We know that December looms nigh, so what can we do for you?
Just wanted to clarify one thing that's in the graphs and everything.
Mhm.
Sunvan was stated separately from paratransit.
Yeah.
Is there a distinction in the services? I thought they were basically the same.
In those services, the way that we broke it out for this analysis was simply to isolate RTA funded services versus Sunvan services specifically. So paratransit is just the name given for the Sun Shuttle paratransit service.
Okay, so they really are one and the same. As far as
Different funding
they're
sources,
for
similar
different
purpose.
funding sources, but basically the service that's being provided is similar.
Very, very much so, yes.
Okay. Let's see. I had one other question. Oh, I wanted to come back to your comparison of the cost per rider. I mean, when you talk about paratransit and you talk about fixed route bus systems, the cost is totally unrelated. And I think that's a perfect example of what I think you were making your point of. Am I right?
Well, I would go so far to say that even among fixed route subcategories, if we look at densely populated urban regions versus express services or crosstown services or rural services, it's just apples and oranges. So there isn't one magic number. It's about as easy as defining regionality, I would say. So
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Right, Carolyn, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. we're asked if we had any further questions on transit. And at our last meeting, I think Davida was talking about, how much it's going to cost to keep the current service. And I don't think she could give us an exact number, but the 510 that is included in the TMC recommendation, she's thought that maybe that could keep current service. So, I'm not sure if this is a fair question to ask if you don't really know. And we're just talking about today's dollars, I guess. But would it be possible to break down how much in the different subcategories we would need in RTA Next to continue the service that was paid for, that is being paid for, but that, we got from the RTA 1. So we would know that what that amount would be to just keep what we got now in frequency and weekend and all that without going into expansion. And then, the circulators and everything that we have in the subcategories. That would be really helpful to have, so we have a starting point. And then there was another number she was talking about, which was the whatever you called it in the COA, like service refinements, if you wanted to not cut anything, because there was some debate over that, which are you going to cut routes? Are you going to cut frequency? So I don't know, is that a fair question to ask? Would you give us some dollars for that to include, to compare to?
Speaker, and Carolyn, thank you so much for your question. I will go ahead I'll go ahead and get the exact numbers for you squared away, but upon rough estimate, earlier RTA estimates say that about 70 to 75% of RTA Next funding will be going towards existing services. I think I said it in a previous meeting, if you'll recall. But as for COA analysis, that process is still ongoing. So final recommendations have not been made. But you will get the report on exactly how much those dollars will be without removing any service as well.
I understand that, but Davida had, it seemed a different forecast on all of those. It wasn't a 70%, it was kind of like 100% of it, Davida from Suntran. And she also mentioned the same thing about, so I'm wondering if Suntran has those numbers.
Because of the wildly volatile nature of transit funding, it is really difficult to predict by how much we'll see transit operations adjust for different metrics like inflation and labor costs. I'll remind the committee that about 70% of all transit operational costs are wrapped up in labor. So those are your operators, your mechanics, dispatchers. And because of that, those labor costs are oftentimes the most volatile of transit operations.
If I may add to that, Mr. Chair, again, I think Carolyn, what you're referring to is we have basically made the assumption that the revenues will also have some potential growth. So again, it's deflating the revenue back to 2022 dollars and comparing those apples and apples. If you try to do inflation adjustment on one, then you got to do it on both sides. So that's saying, where you're saying there was a larger amount would be required, while at the same time, then we would have to obviously inflate our revenue side, and then that's the comparison we were talking about. So without doing that, if we don't deflate the revenue, then yes, of course, our expenditures are.
Understand. I just sound like that the RTA was using apples and apples too. So I was just, a question as to how to get those. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Rhett, did you want to weigh in?
That's Steve. Guys, he walked in under my name, Steve.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's talking about you.
Yeah, I do. I do have, first I got an observation, and that's that taking a look at the way we compare costs and performance, we understand, and it's really an industry standard, that you separate paratransit, fixed route, and then low frequency, or, things like express service from peak service. So we really, in this exercise, we didn't focus on that because the committee had asked us to take a look at the COA and project some costs for you, assuming adding all of the improvements that had been suggested in the COA. And we did that. And I'm curious, did the committee get a copy of the work we did?
Yes, we did.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure and so you've seen that and you understand the cost. That was my only question. Thank you.
We understand, we just can't count that high.
Well, yeah, I understand that too. So we thought we were answering the question though, and Davida is on. If you need some detailed descriptions of how we got to the numbers, we're happy to provide those. So. Okay. I'm sorry, I got a little confused. You got off on system performance. So. And I can't.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. And we'll have one last comment from Moss.
Thank you. I just wanted to go back to the speaker just before who Carolyn was asking questions of. There was you stated that 70 to 75% will go toward existing services. What's the what's like the number that you're saying? Is that the 510 or is that the 691? But 70 to 75% of that will go towards existing services.
That's the 510 amount.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for being engaged today. And we will certainly take your comments and ideas to the ad hoc committee, and we'll report back at our next meeting. Thanks. We're adjourned.
Thank you. Good stuff.